I guess I would suggest like exploring what bravery really means, because the true definition of bravery is not about never feeling fear, but it's rather facing your fear regardless.
Hey there, Vibers. Welcome to the Vibe with Kai podcast, where we keep it real, we keep it relatable, and we keep it a little bit funny as we dive into all things mental health, ADHD, and introversion. My name is Kai. I'm your host, and each week we're going to tackle life struggles with honesty, humor, and a whole lot of heart. So whether you're here for practical advice or a little validation or just a laugh about what life is like as an adult in today's world, listen, you are in the right place. We are not about toxic positivity here. We are all about being genuine to each other and to ourselves. And we're talking about real things. And we want to encourage each other and remind you that you are not alone. With that said, my friends, sit back, relax, and let's vibe through this together and enjoy today's episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast.
What up, Vibers? Welcome to another episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. It's your boy, Kai. In today's episode, we're diving into an important and often overlooked topic, in my opinion, which is men's mental health, specifically dads, fathers, and their unique struggles. And I brought in the perfect person to help us break this down. Joining me today is my friend and the most frequent guests on my podcast, the incredible Chelsie Maccarone. You have not gotten sick and tired of me yet, and I have not gotten sick and tired of you, and I'm pretty sure the audience hasn't gotten sick and tired of you either, and trust me, they would let me know because my audience is very vocal about a lot of things, and I love them for it. Yes, so no, they love you, and here's what I love. Chelsie, she's not just like any therapist. She's a licensed mental health counselor with over 9 years of experience helping others through life's toughest transitions. She's all about making therapy feel like home and connecting the dots between the mind, the body, and the spirit. And she's also a mom who knows the messy life all too well of parentage. And she always brings humor and heart and a whole lot of expertise to the conversation. So I'm super excited to have her here. And today we're going to talk about dads and the struggle with mental health and how we can break the stigma surrounding that and what families can do to best support the men in their lives. So whether you're a dad or you're married to one or just trying to understand your own dad better, this episode is for you. With that said, hi, Chelsie. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me, as always.
Of course. Before we started recording today, we were talking because you live down in Florida. That's where your practice is based out of. And you were saying, oh my gosh, we had snow.
Not where I
this
live,
week.
But yes, in the state.
Oh, I thought it was where you lived. That's a big ass state.
No.
Okay, well, the way you were talking, I thought you were like, oh, we got snow in Fort Lauderdale.
It will affect a lot of my clients, too.
That's fair.
We didn't get snow in Fort Lauderdale.
That's fair.
But it did get in the 40s as the high.
Oh, no, not the 40s.
I'm
ribbing her.
in the middle of the night because there was freeze and I didn't want my tropical plants to die. Bring them inside.
Oh, 40 degrees. What am I? I'm ribbing because obviously those of you that know me, y'all know that I live in the Northeast, and 40 is not. That would be summer for us right now. If it was 40 degrees, we'd be like, oh, yeah, it's summertime.
But because you're used to that.
Last week, it was like 15 degrees, so I wouldn't hear anything.
But you have gear for that, right? Because you're used to it. I don't have That's sweaters. True. I have leggings. Like, what?
Do you hear, my friends? Do you hear those struggles of living in Fort Lauderdale? We don't have sweaters in Fort Lauderdale. What are we to do when the weather's 40 degrees? Oh no, what are we to do? I'm joking. Of course.
So in 2010. Yes. When Uggs were super popular, the girls down here, when it would get down to like 72, they would wear Uggs with like denim mini skirts.
Oh,
and their Ugg boots.
Gosh.
That was the style in 2010 with like 2-layered like shirts so you could see
that
both
needs
colors.
To stay in Fort Lauderdale.
It stayed in 2010. It's long gone.
It needs to stay in 2010. It needs to stay in 2010 Fort Lauderdale.
I'm showing my age though. Let me hold on.
Oh my gosh. So we're talking about dads, fathers, all of these types of things. Do you have a lot of clients like that are fathers, that are dads? Like, is there a lot of men that come to you asking for help? Is that something you see often?
I wouldn't say it's the majority of my caseload, because I think that there is a stigma about looking for and seeking out mental health services as a man. And especially a little bit down here, our demographic is very, Latino, and that's just like a big thing, suck it up, suck it up, bucko, like just kind of like that kind of mentality. But, I am a perinatal certified therapist. And when we talk about postpartum mental health, we think a lot about the moms. We talk a lot about the moms, mom and baby, mom and baby. And when you work with birth workers, it's mom and baby, mom and baby, mom and baby. And one of the things that I'm finding is dads don't have resources. There's just nowhere for them to go. They don't think that their mental health is impacted by becoming a dad, or like they just don't know about it. And this is fun fact. 1 in 10 dads actually develop some kind of postpartum mood or anxiety disorder.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I say mood or anxiety, depression, anxiety, what's the other one? OCD, that kind of stuff. And so, and you see that, and they don't know that's a thing.
It's funny because I feel as though, and I know this from personal experience, men are often conditioned to suppress their emotions. Like we're like, just like you said, suck it up, throw some dirt on it.
Right.
Growing
Stop
up,
crying.
right? Exactly.
You're
Men,
fine.
like, men, don't cry. You're fine. Be a man about it. Like that kind of thing is what I was raised with, especially playing sports growing up and all of that. And it's kind of become like this cultural norm in our Western society, but that has long-term effects on a person, though, right? Especially a man, that has long-term effects. How does that affect a man's mental health later in life?
So you'll see things like, anxiety and depression creeping up on them, but also too like anger issues, right? Like hot temper, which if untreated or unrecognized could lead to alcoholism. It could lead to, a jail. Like think about it. You get pissed off, you beat up a car. Like, okay, well, I didn't hit her, but I beat up a car, that kind of a thing. And so, I think that, and I also, I think that what you said is great, because as you were talking about it, it reminds me of like the youth. And I don't know how old most of your listeners are, but back when I was in school, school age, it was a lot about like girl power, like bring up our girls. And so we were really embracing femininity and teaching women to find their voice and find their power and find their strength. And I think somewhere along the lines, little boys got lost. And so now we have this generation of men who don't have a space. They don't have a role, because now we have empowered, strong, vocal women who are independent, making their own money, making their own careers. And traditionally, it was men who did that. And now we have these women, and there's where do the men fit in? And I'm not saying that in like this anti-feminism, because I am a huge feminist in this capacity, but more of an understanding the subconscious psyche of these men who don't have a traditional role and don't know what their new role is, because we didn't give them one. And sure, the obvious response is, well, your partner. But what does that look and feel like? And I think that there is some animal lizard brain where men need to be providers. They need to feel strong and powerful and protector. And I think that that can look new in the 2025. That can look different from the 1950s dad. But what does that look like, and how do we define it, and how do we teach our youth who they can be as men, as adults when they grow up?
Right. It's tough because, and you kind of touched upon this in your answer. It's tough because having this kind of conversation about getting men help and and all of that, sometimes it can come off as anti-woman, anti-feminine, which it makes the conversation a little bit tougher to have, because when you highlight the struggles that men have from a mental health standpoint, sometimes the response that I'll get sometimes is, well, women have it harder, which is like, I'm not going to sit here and argue or like have that conversation, because that's a totally separate conversation. But like, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because it's tough to have that conversation. Most of my audience are women, And I've learned a lot from them, and they've helped me on my mental health journey. And I'll admit there are some times when I'll talk about my mental health, and I'll every so often will get met with the response with, well, try having ADHD as a woman, or try having, anxiety as a woman. And I kind of feel as though it invalidates my journey. And I don't say anything back because I don't want to come off as anti-woman or invalidating their journey and their struggles or all of that. What are your thoughts on that kind of conversation?
So I think, to answer your question directly, I think it's not fair to compare, right? So that's my direct answer. But then I think the longer version is, whether you're man or woman or anywhere in between, you can't compare your journey to somebody else's, right? So for example, I had a client who came to me and was like just struggling about like something with work. And she was like, but I know people have it worse, and like people out there, people are losing loved ones or battling for their lives. And like, I really don't have it that bad, but this is really impacting me. And it's like, you can't compare your experience to what somebody else is going through, because it's all subjective. And you know what I mean? So yeah, as a woman, is it harder? For sure. Because just in, my grandmother's lifetime, women didn't have the right to vote. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like in my mother's lifetime, women couldn't have a credit card without their husband's signature, Yeah, and so like, yes, is it harder as women? Sure. In some aspects, but I think men also have it hard. And like we were just talking about, like the new age of men have it really hard, because what does it mean to be man? What does it mean to be a supportive partner as a man? Right. Where is my space? How can I be protector and provider and show my strength as a man when you don't need me? You want me, sure, but you don't need me. So how do I flex this energy? Where do I put this energy? And that's not taking into account depression, anxiety, like all these mental health stuff. This is just societal. And then, and it's not even taking into account culture and background and, trauma is generational. Like, it's not taking any of that into account. This is just America. This isn't even like Black America, Latin America. Like, it's not any of that. This is just America. And so I think, we really need to not compare our personal experiences, whether it's as women or as people, to those who are presenting with a challenge in their life. We don't know, what they overcame. It's like, oh, college was really hard. Well, it was really hard for me too. I had to pay my own way and work 3 jobs. That doesn't mean that their experience didn't feel burdensome.
Right. It's really interesting because of all of this, it's sometimes very difficult for men, especially fathers, when they do, if they do go to therapy. It's hard for us to open up sometimes because we're not used to being so much in a vulnerable state with somebody. When you're talking with these men, these fathers, how do you help them feel comfortable to open up? How do you get them to that point?
I have no idea.
And that's all we have time for, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
I don't know specifically what it is that I do, that I encompass, that I have. But like you said, I really strive to make therapy feel like home. So usually on my consultation calls, the first session, whatever, I really just try and like let people know I'm on their side, whether they're man, woman, whatever. It also helps. I have 2 male therapists on staff. So generally men are looking for male therapists. And so I just give them. But if they're looking to work with me specifically, I'm kind of an untraditional therapist in the sense of I do use a lot of like self-disclosure. Self-disclosure, all that means is talking about yourself. A lot of times therapists are very clinical and they won't even have like a picture of their family on their desk. Like it's usually like that. And more you're learning more about your therapists, as we get older and the newer generations. But so I'll draw on personal experiences and I'll be like, oh my gosh, my husband will say something very similar to that. And here's what we did to work through it. Or here's what our therapist did. And,
So you're taking things that you've experienced in your real life to help provide, I guess, some insight for the father that you're speaking with in that session.
Yeah. And I think sometimes knowing that like I see it in my husband and I can be present for it in my own personal life, makes them feel like, oh, well, if she can see it with her loved one, she can see it.
Right, right. Do you think that masculinity is shaping how much men avoid therapy? Because like getting men there, like especially dads, to that point where they go to therapy is one thing, which we just talked about, but a lot of times dads will just completely avoid therapy altogether.
Yeah.
Is that because of the masculinity that we were talking about before?
Yeah. So, and I love that you say masculinity. And I don't want to get too social, what's the word? Sociological about it.
Right. Right.
But masculinity really is a perception, right? We define what masculine looks and feels like and means.
Right.
So I think I think that is, well, what is our perception of masculinity? Right? If you have a family that's like, no, like, say you're angry, like, take it out. Let's go chop some wood in whatever, like whatever it is, like, then that's masculinity, is like going out in the woods and screaming and talking about your feelings with your dad and having like a men's group and just powwow, whatever. And I'm sure there are some families and some cultures where that is the norm. But I think that we've created this idea of masculinity of just stuff it, put on your big boy boots and do it. And that is masculine. But I think that with this new wave of femininity, which is more of leaning into their masculine energy, whatever that means, their men are starting to lean more into, well, we can talk about this. We can share about this. We're feeling this. We don't need to shut it down.
Yeah.
And I think it's becoming a little bit more acceptable. And I think dads, this is going to sound really like sexist, but I think dads of daughters are really good at this too. I think daughters really, and I see this in my husband, but I think that daughters really teach men how to tap into that more vulnerable side. It's for some reason, it's harder to tell a little girl, stop crying, than a little boy, right? A little girl, you say, what's wrong? What happened? Who hurt my little girl? I'm going to go kill them, right?
Exactly.
But I think that taps into that innate need to be protector and provider.
Right. It's really interesting because, like, so we talked about dads in therapy and getting them to open up. We talked about why they avoid it. But the even more difficult part is that sometimes dads and fathers may not even recognize that they need mental health support. Like, it's just not a thought that they think of. And in that case, that's when loved ones come into play, your partners, your wives, your daughters, your sons, friends, whatever it may be. How can the loved ones in our lives help dads when they don't recognize that they might need professional mental health support?
This is going to be one of my it depends answers, right? And it does depend,
because it's not black and white. Like there's nuance and there's so much that goes into it. Yeah, I get it.
I mean, and so I'll just give like one example, and again, it's a personal example, but like my husband was struggling. He was getting angry, and he was quick to anger, and that was just like his first. He was like the seven dwarfs, grumpy. Like he was just always. And so I said to him, like, gently, I was like, why don't you talk to some of your friends about this? Like his guy friends. I was like, why don't you talk to some of them about it? And what's going on? He's like, I don't know, grumble, right? And then there were some books, and I gently like pushed those books. And then eventually it started to really impact like our relationship and our marriage. And finally I just said to him, we're going to couples therapy because now this is impacting the couples. And I got online and I made an appointment with my wonderful, wonderful therapist. Susan Nelson, if anybody wants to like go check her out.
Shout out to Susan Nelson.
But yeah, it just, I think sometimes you can do the gentle, sometimes you can do the strong arm. It just depends on your relationship with that person. But I think importantly, when it comes to dads specifically, I think these birth workers really need to tap into that too. Whether it's screening the dads, whether it's creating dad support groups in your local area. I mean, we have so much mommy and me, moms groups, play dates with the moms. Like we have so much stuff for us. And we really don't have much for dads. And it's funny because I had a meet and greet with a speech therapist, and she does mommy and me groups, but she just started doing daddy and me groups because she was noticing that there wasn't anything for the dads.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I sometimes, like when I see this just in my normal studies in general and things I observe, but while getting ready for this interview, I was very curious at why people may challenge this, like the idea of men, specifically fathers and dads going to therapy. And there was something really interesting I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Yeah.
Some people argue that therapy isn't necessary for dads, and that traditional roles that dads play, like that, should just remain unchanged. How do you respond to that?
So I think if you are a firm, like traditional person, cool. But I think that mental illness is still really real. And I think mental health is still really real. And I think that postpartum for dads too is also still really real. Like the statistics don't lie. So if you have, let's just take a traditional 1950s household where mom stays at home with the kids and dad is still working. It's still hard for dad to feel invisible. It's still hard in that fourth trimester, basically the first 3 months of the baby's life, to feel like a bystander. And you feel some way that you lose your wife, because you kind of do for a short period of time, right? Mom is a bed and breakfast for that baby, right? If you birth the baby, right? If you're birthing the baby and you're breastfeeding and all that stuff, like baby sleeps on you, baby eats from you, you're like, it's just you and baby. And for 9 months too, it's in utero, but you still have your wife. So when baby's here, there's a huge loss of routine, a huge loss of your mate. It's a huge shift. So even though he gets to go to work for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever, he doesn't get to come home to his wife. He comes home to his wife who's a mom. And that's a huge adjustment. And that can create anxiety. And again, you talk about the stuffing. Now he's avoiding. He doesn't want to go home. A lot of the times you'll see couples really don't make it past like the first 5 years of the child's life. They usually divorce or separate, or somebody turns to alcoholism. Like there's usually an adjustment disorder going on there, because I think a lot of the anxiety or the depression with dad isn't being addressed. So what does he do? He stonewalls. And now his wife, who has postpartum hormones, even if they don't have a postpartum mood and anxiety disorder, they still have these crazy wild hormones. You just grew a human and then expelled the human, and now your body's like doing all this crazy thing. She doesn't recognize herself. So she's going through her own adjustment. And it's a wild impact on a marriage. And it definitely highlights any areas that were fractured in the relationship prior to baby. And so, yes, I think dads definitely need, especially new dads, whether you're first time or second time or whatever, but when you're a new dad, definitely need that mental health support, because it is a huge shift in the relationship, in the household, in the marriage, and the dynamic.
I also saw that there's a lot of men who avoid therapy because it makes them appear as weak or less capable of being a good father or a good dad or a good partner, a good husband. How do you address that? How do you address that kind of conversation?
Well, usually those types of people aren't coming to us because there's still so much stigma. Yeah. But I think if there's somebody that's feeling that way and avoiding therapy because they feel like it makes them weak, I guess I would suggest like exploring what bravery really means. Because the true definition of bravery is not about never feeling fear, but it's rather facing your fear regardless, right? And so if you're afraid of feeling weak and you give into that fear, is that real bravery?
Look at that dropping. That was a mic drop kind of moment right there, Ms. Ma'am.
And then when you're in therapy, you can talk about, this is uncomfortable because this redefines what masculinity means to me. And this feels like it makes me feel weak, right? So face the fear of doing it, do it, and then address that concept in therapy that, oh, now I'm a weak man because I'm here in therapy. When really it's building your strength. Just like you go to the gym to build your muscles, why wouldn't you go to therapy? Yes, to build your mind and your heart.
Yeah. I'm always a big proponent of, like,
I like how you like flex, like, and like legit. You're just like, oh, time for me to show off, get some of that OnlyFans like action.
Well, I always say to people, I wish we treated mental health the same way that we treated physical health, because the way that you just described going to the gym for your physical health, like I wish there was like a Planet Fitness for mental health, because it would help so many people. Maybe I just stumbled upon something. Maybe I need to create a Planet Fitness for mental health, and I just became a millionaire.
It's like while you're on the treadmill, you have like your therapist like walking beside you going, yes, it's like,
why,
you can
why are you
all.
crying? Why did you cry this morning? Why? What's going on? Talk to me.
Well, let me tell you the pressures of the day.
I had a bad day today.
I wanted to punch my boss in the face. I found out
stumbled.
My wife was having an affair.
I think we just stumbled upon something, because like,
sorry, I'm like
my ADHD is controlling my day. You know what's funny? The people that can't see us and they just hear us, they're like, what are they doing?
I forgot that they're not all visual, that you have also audio only. Okay. Yes. We're pumping iron like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Listen, that's just more of a reason for people to watch, you know, like that's really funny. I want to give some practical advice for the dads out there, because I know that there's going to be some that either stumble upon this podcast episode, or maybe somebody in their lives send them this episode. So I want to talk directly to the dads here that may have stumbled across this podcast episode. What are some small actionable steps that dads can take to begin improving their mental health journey?
Small actionable steps. That's not in my notes. Okay.
I can ask a different question.
No, you're fine. No, I think honestly, like the first thing, like the very first, and it's not a small step, it's kind of a big step, is recognizing, I'm having a hard time here. I'm not coasting anymore. Like, this is rough. Right. And so I think once you can admit that to yourself, then you can say, all right, what small steps can I do, right? Can I find a support group? Can I create a daddy and me group, a play date group? Can I, it reminds me of that movie. What was it? Bad Dads? Good Old Dads? Old Dads. And they had like the dad group, and they all like hung out at the playground with their kids. Anyways, and you know, so you can do that. And then really honestly being honest with yourself, like, I don't feel right. Like, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel like I enjoy the things I used to do. I need to talk to a professional. I need to talk to someone, and being okay with that. Like, really, really saying, this is not a sign of weakness. This is a sign of, I have a toothache. I'm going to the dentist.
Yes. Like, I feel like sometimes dads will sometimes say, well, this is hard for me because I have to balance work and family and self-care now, you know, and they'll feel like they're falling short in probably one of those areas, whether it be work or family or self-care. How can fathers find that balance between those three things?
Well, when you figure it out, let me know, because
that's the golden question, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's always a juggling act, right? Like, very, very few moments in our lives do we feel at homeostasis. There's always something, and I think we talked about this once before, when we feel bored, when we feel neutral, we go in self-sabotage, right? And
yes, we did talk about that.
Yeah. And so I think for not a big portion of our lives is it like, my bank account is balanced, my work life is balanced, this is like very few and far between. Like, there's usually something that we're actively working on, whether it's fitness goals, whether it's financial goals, whether it's travel goals, like there's always something that we're actively working on. So I think it's less about like finding the balance and more about finding the priority. So things are like, go ahead.
Oh, so no, please go ahead.
So I just want to give an example of what I mean by that.
Yeah,
so
please.
Like if things are like going copacetically at work, like it's fine, you got the promotion or you didn't, but you know, like things are good, but you realize things are not so great with the home life, right? Work on the home life, right? It's not that takes priority. It's not about finding balance between the two. You may have to like leave work an hour early and like kind of like steal from the work pile to like feed and fuel your home pile. And so it might not be a perfect balance, but it's more like overall, like over the stretch of time, is it balanced? You know, sometimes it's going to look like this and this.
Right. And you take it day by day. Like there's no one answer. There's no one way. Each day presents a different challenge. And so you just kind of find what works for you in that moment, and you just do what's best for you. And like you said before, like once you find the answer, like let us know, because there is, I mean, I think it's not that there's no answer, it's just that there's multiple answers. Like there's multiple ways to go about finding what works best for you, because we're all different. We all have different situations and different families, different jobs, different things that we need to from a self-care standpoint that we need to take care of. So there's a lot of different things
and different stages of your life. Right. So like what used to work to balance my life 10 years ago doesn't work today to balance my life.
Right. Exactly. We had talked about how like our loved ones can, you know, talk to dads about potentially getting help. But are there signs that like a dad himself can like, I guess, recognize that shows like, oh, hey, I need some help. I need to get some professional help here.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the symptoms of having like a postpartum like anxiety or depression as a dad are, I don't want to say are kind of like normal, but like you can chalk it up to anything. Fatigue. Well, duh, I'm a new-time dad. I have a newborn. I'm not sleeping. Headaches, muscle aches, stomach issues, changes in appetite, irritability, anger. We talked about being a little more impulsive than normal. So I mean, there's the symptoms. It could be, oh, like you have a flu, or you know what I mean? Like the symptoms are kind of general. And so I think really it's about knowing yourself. Knowing yourself and being like, oh man, I would never have talked to Sharon in finance the way I spoke to her yesterday. Something's up with me.
Sorry, Sharon in finance. I didn't mean it.
I don't have a finance department, so this is totally made up. But you know what I mean? Like,
there's a Sharon in finance listening to this right now being like, oh my God.
How did she know?
You know what? That was an awkward moment last week. How did they know that happened? So Sharon in finance, this episode is dedicated to you. Okay.
Sharon in finance and Susan Nelson, my personal couple.
Yes. The two shout out sponsors for this episode.
Oh my God, I'm going to send this to Susan. She's going to have a great time.
Do you find a lot of dads, I guess, feel isolated? Because like I think a lot of times, like especially with like single dads that are out there, that like that's a conversation I think people don't talk about a lot, like single dads. Because I mean, I always think single parents are superstars, like they're legit superheroes, and we often talk about single moms, understandably. But it's not often that we talk about single dads.
No.
And I'm curious if you ever come across like single dads that feel isolated, like they're just by themselves and they may not have a support system.
Yes.
You know,
and they're
how
always
do they handle themselves? Yes, sure.
So I had a single dad. We were having a conversation, and I don't remember how it came up, but somebody had said to him, like, why don't you try and get more time with your child? And he was commenting on how he felt like his child didn't want it because his child would cry for mom. His child would look scared to be alone with him. And he was going through his own depression and like things way before. But he felt like he wasn't good enough to be a father. So why would he fight for more time with his child?
Right.
And so on the outside, you look at this deadbeat dad who only gets their kid once a week and only buys them toys or only does whatever, or gets to be the fun dad and take them to the fair once a week or whatever it is. But that's on the outside. On the inside, it's very isolating. And it's like, he's like, who would understand what I'm saying? Like, who can I talk to about this? Nobody gets it. Mom's doing all the work. Mom's, the hero in this.
Right.
And so, yes, a lonely island.
It it's really interesting because that was one of the questions that I had was for like the daughters and the sons and the spouses that are out there. What advice, or not what advice, but like how important is it for them to provide a safe space for dads to express their feelings? How important is it for them to create that space for dads?
I think it's important for everyone, dads included.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we're just more mindful of the moms and the children. We're not as mindful about the dads because, I mean, to be fair, like it's a patriarchal society. So men have it generally easier in a lot of ways. So it's easy to kind of just brush off their needs and just be like, they're fine.
Right.
So I think, I think it's important. I think it's highly important. Especially, again, hate to sound sexist, but especially if you have a daughter. Her father is her first example of what a romantic relationship would look like. And if she has a father who is stonewalling and angry and isolated and depressed and not knowing how to manage and navigate his emotions and just takes it out on the family or whoever, and she's monitoring that and observing that, well, guess who she's going to marry? Right? And so I think it's super important to have dads feel like it's safe to be like, I'm overwhelmed.
Right. What else is in your I want you to look at your notes right now.
Okay.
Look through those notes and be like, oh, I need to make sure I get this across in this podcast.
Oh, I said the most important thing. The most important thing that I wrote down is 1 in 10 dads experience postpartum depression. And then 15%, up to 15% can develop an anxiety disorder outside of postpartum phase. Obsessive compulsive PTSD at some point during their partner's pregnancy, the first year or further on. So it's just like little stats because I'm not good with like numbers. That's why I really put that stuff down. But it can really impact the whole family's well-being. You know, depressed dads can discourage their partner from breastfeeding. They might be more likely to engage in the DV, domestic violence. You know. Let me see. What else did I mean? Oh, we already went over symptoms. Yeah. I don't know why I write notes anymore. We already talked about it.
because it's important. I think it's important because Lord knows I know nothing, and so I'm like, let me bring on an expert who can talk some factual information here. No, this is fantastic, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people that benefit from this. How do you envision, things going like from this point 5 years from now in 2010? How do you envision mental health and dads? Like, where will that sit in 5 years from now?
5 years in 2010? You mean 2030?
Oh, no.
I mean, college real quick.
What happened to me? I was like, yeah, 2010. Like, what do you talk? I'm looking at you like you're wrong. I'm like, yeah, 2010. What are you talking? What is wrong with you?
2005, baby.
Meanwhile, you're in the future in 2025 being like, okay, this 2005 kid is still stuck in the past. Okay, let's rephrase that. 2030.
Yeah, so in 5 years, plus 5, not minus 15.
Yes.
I don't know if too much is going to change in 5 years. I don't think that there's a huge political movement on mental health, really.
Sure.
We have much bigger fish to fry anyway. I think systemically, maybe you might see a little shift, but there's not a whole lot of advocacy, especially for perinatal mental health within the family unit, men and women.
Right.
I'm just now seeing a huge advocacy for perinatal mental health for moms, but like my OB didn't screen me for postpartum depression, and I had my child 3.5 years ago.
Right.
I'm trying to be part of that advocacy group with OBs and medical treating clinicians, doctors, whatever. But like I have like 3 pediatric professionals. One's a dentist and 2 are pediatrician, like primary care doctors. And I'm now sending them stuff to like screen, and a PT group. I'm sending them screening tools for postpartum mental health. But that's going to really just target the moms.
Sure.
You know, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping we can get enough out there. I mean, I know I briefly mentioned I'm doing this event in Tampa, Florida, called Dads in Motion. It's a community event for fathers and families, and I'll be a vendor there talking about father mental health. Like, I don't want to say paternal mental health, because I Googled paternal mental health, like ideas for marketing, and it was like perinatal mental health. And I was like, no, like paternal instead of maternal, but Google was confused. So I try not to use it. But, so my flyers say fatherhood matters instead of paternal mental health.
Got it. Yes. You're like, let me just play it safe.
Yeah, let me play on words a little better layman terms. But yeah, so I'm not sure what 5 years. I'm hoping in 10 years we'll see more daddy and me groups. We'll see more it's okay to be vulnerable in like for dads. You know, I'm hoping we'll see a little bit more of that.
Yeah, me too.
But 5 years, I'm not sure. Well. Maybe I'm a cynic.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Maybe in 2010 things will
maybe in 2010.
Maybe in 2010
they'll wear 2 layers of shirts. They'll pop it. Yes, pop the collar.
And with and with our boots and our jean skirts.
Yeah. I think that was like strictly a South Florida thing. I don't know if that went anywhere else.
I think that might have been a Fort Lauderdale thing. With that said, friends, this is Chelsie Maccarone. Your practice, Healthy Minds and More counseling services, based in Florida, and you serve all of Florida. Am I correct?
We are a virtual.
A virtual practice serving all of Florida. Do you serve New Hampshire too?
So one of our therapists is licensed in New Hampshire. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. So if you're listening and you're in Florida and you're like, hey, my dad would benefit from talking with her, or you are a dad and you're like, hey, I want to talk with her, one of her experts that she has in house. I will include the website for Chelsea's practice, Healthy Minds and More, in the description of this podcast. So make sure you click and go visit, and just check it out. If anything, just go check it out, see if it's something for you, and then go from there. Chelsie, thank you for spending time with me again. I think this is your 45th time on the.
No, it's not.
It's not. But you're up there. I think I dare I say 6th or 7th or 8th.
I was gonna say like 10, but sure.
Actually, it might be.
I have some of our older ones on my website. I'll go count them.
Yeah. It might be. I'm gonna find out the exact number, because if the next one is the 10th, we gotta do something special. If the next one is the 10th,
we'll do some more working out. Just
we're gonna do some
visual only.
Planet Fitness, mental health. Let's go.
Yeah. And if your listeners like the Q&A, we can do another Q&A, because we haven't done one of those since the inception.
I think we should definitely do another one of those, because there's a whole new slew of people that weren't around
when I was a redhead.
The therapist Q&A, and you were a redhead. I was wearing hats. Like everything changes in 2010 or 2005. We're in 2005.
Whatever we are.
Everything changes in 2005.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found a little bit of comfort in today's episode, and I hope that you're walking away with a little bit of encouragement, and I hope that you laughed a little bit along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe and leave a review. Let me know what you thought of the episode. I really want to hear your voice. I want to hear your story. I want to hear all about your journey. Let's keep the conversation going. Make sure you follow me on all of your favorite social media platforms. Follow me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, at The Vibe with Kai, for more tips, more laughs, and more real talk. Remember, my friends, you are not alone on this journey. We are in this together. And until next time, stay kind to yourself, embrace the journey, and keep vibing. I'll catch you next time. Much love. Good vibes.